The crew thought it was funny, dumping trash on a sleeping kid, but when the cockpit door opened and his father stepped out, the laughter died mid-air. The aluminum trash bag crinkled sharply as Ethan Cole dragged it down the aisle. The cabin lights were dim, the hum of engines constant, steady, almost soothing. Most passengers were half asleep, their faces faintly lit by the glow of overhead reading lights. The air smelled faintly of reheated meals and stale coffee, the usual scent of a long flight nearing its final stretch. Ethan's polished shoes clicked on the floor as he moved methodically past each row, collecting wrappers and empty cups. His smile, faint and forced, vanished the moment he turned his back on passengers. When he reached row 16, he paused. The boy in the aisle seat, Jordan Carter, was asleep, headphones still in, chin tilted to one side. His gray hoodie was slightly wrinkled, his backpack tucked neatly under the seat. There was nothing remarkable about him, except perhaps the quiet comfort with which he slept. Ethan's lip curled faintly. Something about that ease irritated him. He glanced over at a nearby passenger, Mr. Daniels, who offered a polite nod, then returned to reading his magazine. Ethan moved on, skipping Jordan's row entirely. His irritation simmered. Earlier, the boy had smiled when boarding, one of those soft, genuine smiles that seemed to require no effort. Maybe that was what had bothered him. To Ethan, the boy looked too calm, too sure of himself, like someone who didn't care about the invisible hierarchies Ethan believed existed between crew and passengers. As he reached the galley, another attendant called out, "Hey, Ethan, turbulence warning just came in." "Secure the carts." Ethan nodded absently, but didn't move to help. Instead, he stared down at the trash bag in his hands. A half-empty cup of coffee sloshed near the top, threatening to spill. A mischievous thought sparked, a mix of annoyance and boredom. His mouth curved into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe stay awake next time," he muttered under his breath, rehearsing the words before the act had even happened. The plane jolted slightly. A few passengers gasped. Ethan used the motion as his cue, gripping the bag tightly and walking back down the aisle. Mr. Daniels looked up again, sensing something off in the man's expression. Ethan stopped at Jordan's row, pretending to steady himself. Then, with an almost deliberate flick, he tipped the bag toward Jordan's lap. The contents spilled instantly. A tangle of napkins, leftover bread rolls, and half-eaten meals. A bit of lukewarm soda splashed across Jordan's hoodie. The smell of old food hit the air, sour and embarrassing. Gasps rippled through nearby passengers. Mr. Daniels froze. The boy stirred, blinking awake, confused at first, then horrified. Jordan looked down at his lap, at the mess soaking into his clothes, his heart pounding in disbelief. What happened?" he asked softly, voice still groggy. Ethan straightened the bag, his face void of remorse. "Maybe stay awake next time," he said loud enough for half the cabin to hear. His tone was casual, almost teasing, but underneath it lingered something sharp, mockery. Jordan stared at him, cheeks burning, hands trembling as he brushed a napkin off his lap. He didn't understand. He hadn't done anything wrong. His throat felt tight, but no words came. Around him, passengers looked away, their silence louder than any insult. The man beside him fidgeted, pretending to check his phone. A boy across the aisle whispered, "That was messed up," but said nothing more. Ethan turned and walked away, the plastic bag swaying at his side. He looked satisfied, his smirk small but unmistakable. For a long moment, Jordan sat frozen. His heartbeat roared in his ears, his eyes stinging. He wanted to disappear. The shame felt heavy, thick and suffocating. He picked up a napkin and wiped his sleeve. A flight attendant from the back, a younger man named Tyler, noticed the mess and hurried forward. "Hey, what happened here?" he asked, glancing between the boy and the trash scattered across his seat. "Nothing," Jordan muttered, his voice small. "Just an accident." Tyler frowned, but said nothing more. He knelt to help clean, offering tissues. His expression said he didn't believe it was an accident, but he knew better than to challenge a senior attendant mid-flight. "Here, let me get you a new blanket," he said gently before walking away. Jordan's hands trembled as he folded the used napkins into a pile. He glanced toward the galley, where Ethan leaned against the counter, laughing softly with another crew member. Every laugh felt like a blow. Jordan stared at the window, the dark sky stretching endlessly beyond the glass. For the first time in his life, he felt small. Not because he was powerless, but because everyone around him had chosen to stay quiet. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Carter adjusted the autopilot and leaned slightly toward the cabin monitor. A small feed displayed the cabin in black and white, looping from multiple angles. He usually ignored it unless there was turbulence or passenger trouble. Tonight, something on the corner of the screen caught his eye. A sudden movement, a flick of a bag, a splash. He rewound the footage a few seconds. The moment replayed, the attendant's hand tilting the bag, the trash spilling, the startled boy jerking awake. Marcus's heartbeat quickened. He zoomed in slightly, focusing on the boy's face. The grainy image showed the same sharp jawline, the same hoodie he'd bought months ago. His chest tightened. Reed, his co-pilot, noticed the change in Marcus's expression. "Everything all right, Captain?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the screen, at the unmistakable face of his son, Jordan, alone, humiliated. He saw the attendant's smirk, the mocking words visible even without sound. His grip on the control column tightened until his knuckles whitened. Reed repeated, "Captain?" Marcus exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the screen. "Mark the time code," he said, voice low but steady. Reed hesitated, glancing at the monitor. "Sir, is that—" "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "That's my son." In the cabin, Jordan stared blankly ahead, his mind spiraling through disbelief. He thought about his father's words before every trip. "Be calm, son. Always be calm when others aren't." He wanted to follow that advice, but calm felt impossible now. Each whisper behind him felt like judgment. Each second stretched longer than the last. Mr. Daniels finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "Son, you all right?" Jordan forced a small nod. "Yeah, it's fine," he said, though his tone betrayed him. The plane rocked slightly again as they passed through a layer of clouds. The seatbelt sign flickered. Ethan reappeared, pretending to check overhead bins, but his glance at Jordan carried no apology, only satisfaction. In the cockpit, Marcus leaned back, his breath shallow. Protocol dictated that he remain professional, detached, but inside a storm brewed. His son was out there, alone, humiliated, and he was trapped behind reinforced doors 30 feet away. He replayed the footage again, studying every detail, every cruel smile. Reed finally said, "You can't step out mid-flight, Captain." "Not unless it's an emergency." Marcus nodded slowly, eyes still on the monitor. "It's not an emergency," he said quietly. "Not yet." Down the aisle, the quiet resumed. Passengers pretended to sleep, unwilling to involve themselves. Only Tyler occasionally looked back toward Jordan's row, his jaw tight. When the meal service ended, he slipped Jordan an extra drink with a small nod, his unspoken apology for what he couldn't fix. Jordan managed a faint thank you. The boy's pride burned, but beneath it something else began to stir. A quiet anger, disciplined but deep. He didn't yet know that his father was watching, or that every second of that cruel act had been captured from 3 angles. He only knew that silence had weight, and that someday someone would have to answer for it. In the cockpit, Marcus kept one hand on the controls and the other on the video console. His eyes never left the frozen image of Ethan's smirk. 1,000 thoughts collided in his mind, but only one found its way to his lips. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried more power than any shout could. His hand tightens around the control column as he whispers, "That's my son." The tray rattled as the cup tilted, its contents spilling across Jordan's lap. The shock of the cold drink hit him before the embarrassment did. Ice and soda seeped into his jeans, the liquid dripping off his hands as he froze, unsure what to say. Ethan, the flight attendant, didn't even flinch. "Oh, sorry, buddy," he muttered without sincerity, already moving the cart forward. His smirk lingered for half a second too long, a private satisfaction flickering in his eyes. The cabin went uncomfortably still. A few passengers turned their heads, pretending not to notice. Others exchanged knowing glances, the kind that said they'd seen such moments before and preferred to stay uninvolved. One older man in a beige jacket leaned toward his seatmate and whispered, "Kids today should learn respect." His tone carried quiet disdain, as if Jordan were the problem. Jordan's breath came unevenly. He reached for a napkin, his hands trembling slightly as he dabbed at his soaked pants. His heart thudded in his chest, not from anger but from shame. He could feel the warmth rising to his face as he noticed the people watching, pretending not to. He looked down, wishing the floor would open up beneath him. Ethan turned his back and pushed the cart toward the galley, his stride relaxed, his arrogance unhidden. He thought the moment was over. He thought no one who mattered had noticed, but someone had. Inside the cockpit, Captain Marcus stared at the small monitor mounted above the console. The internal cabin feed showed the incident clearly. The spill, the smirk, the humiliation. His jaw tightened, a faint muscle pulsing near his temple. He rewound the footage, slowing it down until the soda hit Jordan's lap again, until he saw Ethan's expression freeze on screen. Beside him, First Officer Reed noticed his captain's posture stiffen. "Something wrong, sir?" Reed asked quietly, glancing from the instruments to the screen. Marcus didn't answer right away. His gaze remained locked on the footage. After a long silence, he said in a low voice, "Reed, mark this time code." Reed hesitated. He'd flown with Marcus long enough to recognize that tone, the controlled calm before something serious. He clicked a button on the console, logging the footage. The digital timestamp glowed faintly on the screen. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Keep flying," he said, his voice measured, but his eyes never left the image of Jordan sitting in silence, soda dripping from his sleeve. Back in the cabin, the hum of the engines filled the space again, but the air felt heavier. Jordan could feel the quiet judgment pressing down on him from every direction. He stared out the window, the endless stretch of clouds blurring before his eyes. When a passing attendant, Ethan again, moved down the aisle collecting trash, Jordan lifted his hand slightly. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Can I have a napkin?" Ethan didn't look up. He tossed a folded napkin onto Jordan's tray without slowing his pace. The napkin landed half off the tray, one corner already damp from the spill. Jordan looked at it for a moment, then back out the window. His throat tightened. He thought about his father's words, the ones that had guided him since childhood. "Silence doesn't mean surrender, son. Sometimes it's the calm before the storm." The irony cut deep. He could feel the sting of humiliation morphing into something else, something quieter, heavier. It wasn't anger that filled him, but resolve, the kind that builds slowly and dangerously under the surface. A faint rustle broke the silence. From a few rows back, someone discreetly lifted their phone, pretending to scroll but clearly recording. Another passenger turned slightly, capturing the tail end of the incident on camera. Their expressions were hesitant, unsure whether they were witnessing injustice or just another uncomfortable moment best forgotten. Jordan noticed them but didn't move. He didn't want to cause a scene. He just wanted the flight to end, to walk off the plane and leave this behind. Yet deep down, he knew something had shifted. People had seen. They might pretend to forget, but not everyone would. Ethan passed through again a few minutes later, this time laughing with another crew member near the galley. His voice carried just loud enough for Jordan to hear bits of it, mocking laughter, words like overreacting and just a drink. The sound of it made Jordan's stomach twist, but even as he sat there, trying to hold his composure, something subtle began to happen. The passengers who had witnessed the spill weren't as indifferent now. A man across the aisle gave Jordan a sympathetic glance. A younger passenger further up whispered something to his companion and began typing furiously on his phone. One of them, seated near the back, hit send. The message reached Skylink's customer service before the plane even began its descent. Attached was a 30-second video. Ethan's careless spill, Jordan's humiliation, and the crew member's dismissive smirk all captured clearly in frame. The report was flagged as urgent, marked for escalation due to staff misconduct in flight. In the cockpit, Reed adjusted the throttle slightly, glancing again at Marcus. The captain was still quiet, his face composed but unreadable. "You going to file a report when we land?" Reed asked cautiously. Marcus shook his head once. "Not yet." Reed frowned. "Sir, that was—" "I saw it," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. "And I'll deal with it." He leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the dark horizon ahead. The plane glided smoothly through the thin layer of clouds, its engines humming like a steady heartbeat. Reed shifted uncomfortably. "You know company protocol, right? If this goes public—" Marcus turned slightly, his tone cold but certain. "If it goes public, they'll have a much bigger problem than a protocol breach." The cockpit fell silent. Only the soft chatter of air traffic control filled the space. In the cabin, the atmosphere remained uneasy. Jordan had stopped trying to dry his clothes. The soda had dried into a faint, sticky patch that clung to his shirt. His reflection in the window looked older somehow, tired, worn, and quietly determined. He didn't know that every detail of the incident was preserved: angle, time, sound, and expression, watched by the one man on board who had both authority and reason to act. As the plane began its gradual descent, the fastened seatbelt signs blinked on. Ethan made his announcement, his tone cheerful and rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please ensure your seats are upright and your tray tables are secured." The words rang hollow. Jordan complied silently, buckling his seatbelt, staring ahead. He didn't notice Marcus stepping briefly out of the cockpit, his cap in hand as he exchanged a quiet word with a senior flight attendant near the galley. He didn't see the way Marcus's gaze lingered on Ethan for a second too long, or the look of unease that flickered across Ethan's face when he realized he was being watched. The hum of the engines deepened as the plane began its final approach. Passengers adjusted their belongings, phones buzzed with notifications, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly. But the silence between Marcus and Ethan said more than words could. Ethan forced a polite smile when Marcus passed by, pretending not to understand the reason for the captain's cold stare. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need to. When he returned to the cockpit, Reed noticed the faintest change in his captain's expression, no longer restrained, but quietly resolute. Marcus settled into his seat, glanced at the monitor one last time, and said evenly, "If he thinks that boy's alone, he's in for a surprise." Marcus's fingers hovered over the autopilot controls, his reflection faint in the cockpit glass. The hum of the engines filled the silence between him and his co-pilot, but his thoughts were far louder, sharp, restless, impossible to quiet. The footage kept replaying in his mind. The careless flick of Ethan's wrist, the drink spilling, the mocking smirk. It looped like a curse, burning deeper every time he saw it in his head. He clenched his jaw and tried to focus on the flight instruments, but his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the throttle. "Altitude holding steady," Reed said, glancing at him for a reaction. Marcus gave a small nod, not trusting his voice yet. He knew every inch of this aircraft, every system and code of conduct that governed it. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this, for the sight of his son being humiliated in front of strangers while he sat trapped behind a locked cockpit door. Protocol demanded discipline. He couldn't storm into the cabin, couldn't confront the attendant mid-air. He was the captain of the flight, responsible for over 200 lives, but every instinct in him screamed to act. Reed noticed the tension building in his captain's posture. "Sir," he said cautiously, "if something's bothering you, I can handle communications." "You should take a minute." Marcus didn't look up. His voice was low but steady. "No, we're staying on course." He opened the cabin surveillance feed again. The small monitor flickered, showing rows of passengers illuminated by the dim overhead lights. Ethan appeared briefly at the edge of the frame, laughing with another crew member near the galley. Marcus paused the video, zooming in on the attendant's face. He studied the expression, a smirk of arrogance, unbothered by what he'd done. Marcus's chest tightened. "Reed," he said quietly, "mark this footage again." "Save it under incident log." Reed hesitated. "Shouldn't we report it to the ground crew immediately?" Marcus's eyes stayed fixed on the monitor. "No," he said finally. "We handle it right. Not with anger." He exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his tone. "With precision." Reed said nothing more. He could feel the weight of those words, the kind of control that only came from a man balancing duty and rage on a knife's edge. In the cabin, Jordan sat stiffly, his phone resting in his lap. The flight attendants had resumed their duties as if nothing had happened. The quiet around him felt suffocating. He unlocked his phone and typed a message with shaking hands. Something happened. He hesitated before hitting send. His father had always been busy during flights. Communication mid-air was almost impossible. But before he could even lock the screen, a reply appeared. "I know, son. Sit tight." Jordan blinked. His pulse quickened. How could he possibly know? He glanced toward the front of the plane, toward the closed cockpit door, but said nothing. A strange calm washed over him, though confusion lingered beneath it. Back in the cockpit, Marcus lowered his head for a brief moment. That single message had cost him composure. He could picture his son's face, the mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and quiet strength. The same look he'd seen when Jordan was a boy and stood his ground against bullies, refusing to fight back because his father had taught him restraint. But now, restraint felt like betrayal. Marcus opened the Skylink's digital operations manual on his cockpit tablet. His thumb scrolled through sections of corporate policy, passenger treatment, crew conduct, incident escalation. The words blurred together until he reached the part he was looking for. Clauses on verbal or physical misconduct based on race or personal appearance. His jaw tightened. The airline's own rules left no room for what Ethan had done. He bookmarked the section and sat back, his eyes narrowing. His actions couldn't be reckless. They had to be deliberate, airtight. The kind of move that left no room for denial or defense. "Sir," Reed said quietly, breaking the silence. "You sure you don't want me to file a preliminary report?" Marcus shook his head. "If we do that, it gets buried. Paperwork disappears, complaints get reviewed and forgotten. Number. We do this by the book, but my book, Reed, studied him carefully. He'd seen Marcus under pressure before, emergency landings, equipment failures, turbulence that shook the plane like a storm, but this was different. This wasn't fear. It was purpose." Outside, the sky deepened into a soft orange haze as the plane crossed into Washington airspace. The descent briefing tone chimed softly. Reed began routine checks, reading off altitudes and speeds, but Marcus's focus drifted again to the footage frozen on the screen. Ethan's smirk, his son's silence, the passenger's indifference. It burned. He pressed his palms against the control panel, grounding himself. "Focus," he muttered under his breath. "You're the captain first." Reed looked over. "Sir?" Marcus shook his head. "Nothing. Let's start descent procedures." As the plane began to lower altitude, the cabin lights shifted slightly. Passengers stirred, fastening their seat belts, unaware of the silent storm brewing just beyond the cockpit door. Ethan moved through the aisles, making small talk, completely oblivious. He leaned against the galley counter, whispering something to another attendant that made both of them chuckle. "Some people just can't take a joke," Ethan said under his breath, smirking again. Reed caught a glimpse of the same smirk on the feed. "You're really going to let him keep serving passengers like that?" he asked quietly. Marcus didn't respond at first. Then, after a pause, he said, "When this plane touches down, I'll deal with him." His tone was calm, but the calm was razor sharp. The minutes dragged. The hum of the engines grew lower as the runway lights began to appear in the distance. The world outside turned dark except for the faint glow of Seattle's skyline emerging through the window. Reed noticed Marcus's right hand trembling slightly as it adjusted the autopilot. "You're sure you're okay to land, sir?" he asked. Marcus nodded without looking away from the runway. "I'm fine." It was a lie, but a necessary one. His focus couldn't waver, not yet. The tower's voice crackled through the headset. "Skylinks 217, cleared for final approach." "Skylinks 217, cleared for final," Marcus repeated, his tone controlled, professional. He began the descent manually, his hands steadying on the yoke as the aircraft lowered through the clouds. Reed kept his gaze on the instruments, but his peripheral vision stayed fixed on Marcus, watching, waiting. Inside the cabin, Jordan gripped his seat's armrest as the plane began to tilt forward slightly. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and familiar. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're beginning our final approach into Seattle. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Jordan froze. That voice, his father's, echoed through the cabin, steady as always. But now, knowing what had happened, every word carried weight. Ethan continued his duties without concern, helping passengers stow items, smiling easily. He didn't notice the way the co-pilot occasionally glanced toward the galley camera or the subtle shift in Marcus's tone over the intercom. In the cockpit, Marcus's breathing slowed. The runway light stretched out before him like a path through the dark. Every second brought him closer to the moment he'd been holding back. He thought again of Jordan's message, of his son sitting silently in that seat, trying to stay composed. The image cut through him like glass. Reed adjusted the flaps. 2,000 feet, he said. Marcus nodded. Landing gear down. The gears deployed with a deep mechanical groan. The plane began its slow, controlled glide toward the runway. In his mind, Marcus wasn't thinking of touchdown procedures anymore. He was replaying what he would say, the words that had been forming since the moment he saw that footage, words that weren't from a captain addressing his crew, but from a father addressing a man who had humiliated his son. Reed noticed the shift, the soft mutter under Marcus's breath, almost too quiet to catch. "When this plane touches down," Marcus said, eyes fixed forward, "I'm not the captain." His voice was calm now, but his jaw tightened, emotion breaking through the surface. "I'm a father." The wheels touched down on the runway with a soft but powerful thud, a deep rumble vibrating through the cabin as the engines reversed thrust. Passengers stirred from sleep or distraction, pulling earbuds out, adjusting seat belts, gathering belongings. The familiar chime echoed overhead, followed by a calm, practiced voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle. On behalf of Skylinks Air, we thank you for flying with us today." It was Ethan's voice, smooth, professional, almost too cheerful. The same voice that had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated just hours ago. Jordan heard it from his seat, his stomach twisting. The sound brought back the humiliation like a slap, each word dripping with artificial sweetness that made his jaw tighten. He glanced toward the front, where Ethan stood smiling as if nothing had happened, bowing slightly to passengers as they prepared to disembark. The plane slowed to a stop at gate C-14, and the fastened seatbelt sign went off with a soft chime. Metal clicked, fabric rustled, and the narrow aisles filled with movement. Jordan stayed seated, eyes down, watching people pass him, some giving polite nods, others pretending not to recognize the boy who'd been covered in trash mid-flight. Their silence stung more than words could. Ethan strolled through the aisle, checking overhead bins, projecting authority like he was the one holding the power. His stride was casual, confident, his smirk faint but deliberate when he looked Jordan's way. "All good now?" he asked lightly, voice laced with sarcasm. Jordan didn't answer. His hands tightened on his backpack straps. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't about to give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing him react. When most passengers had filed out, the cabin felt strangely quiet, emptied of chatter, filled with only the low hum of air vents and the clicking of seatbelt buckles. Ethan moved toward the front, still humming to himself. "Another smooth flight," he muttered under his breath, straightening his tie as if preparing for applause. Then the cockpit door opened. The sound was subtle, almost drowned out by the noise of passengers exiting, but it froze Ethan in place. He turned, expecting perhaps another pilot or ground staff. Instead, Captain Marcus Carter stepped out. He filled the doorway, not just with his stature, but with his presence. The crisp Navy uniform, the gold stripes on his sleeves, the gleam of his captain's wings. He looked composed, authoritative, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp and cold, locked directly on Ethan. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was thick enough to still the air. "Captain Carter," Ethan said quickly, straightening. "Sir, everything went smoothly. Cabin secure, all passengers disembarked except—" He faltered, noticing Jordan sitting quietly a few rows back. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by slow, dawning realization. Marcus stepped forward, each footfall deliberate. His expression didn't change. "Is this," he said evenly, "how you treat passengers on my aircraft?" Ethan's breath caught. The question wasn't loud, but the authority behind it carried like thunder. "Sir?" Ethan stammered, his confident posture faltering. I don't understand what you mean." Marcus stopped just short of the galley, arms folded behind his back. His voice stayed calm, professional, but every syllable landed with precision. "You deliberately humiliated a young man during service. You think I didn't see it? Ethan forced a nervous laugh. "Sir, I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding. The, the young man spilled something and—" Marcus didn't move closer. Instead, he lifted his chin slightly, gesturing toward the small black dome above the forward exit. "That misunderstanding," he said quietly, "is recorded from 3 angles." The color drained from Ethan's face. The room seemed to shrink around him. His eyes darted to the camera, then to Marcus, then to Jordan. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "Sir, I didn't realize—" Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "Didn't realize what? That passengers deserve respect, or that the person you disrespected is my son." The silence that followed was deafening. The engines were quiet, the passengers gone, the world outside the narrow windows still. Ethan's mouth opened slightly as if to respond, but no words came. He was stripped of his smirk, of his composure, reduced now to nervous shifting and shallow breathing. Jordan rose from his seat slowly, backpack slung over one shoulder. His eyes flicked between them, unsure if he should step forward. His father glanced at him briefly, one look that said everything. "You don't have to fight this one. I'm here now." Ethan swallowed hard. "Captain Carter, I didn't mean any harm. I thought it was just—" Marcus cut him off with a calm, steady tone. "You thought wrong." A faint shuffle at the front drew attention. Another man had stepped onto the aircraft, a middle-aged flight service manager named Mr. Keene, clipboard in hand, looking mildly annoyed after a long day. He paused when he saw Marcus and Ethan standing face to face. "What's going on here?" Keene asked, his voice cautious. Marcus didn't turn. His eyes stayed on Ethan as he spoke. "Mr. Keene, I suggest you review the cabin surveillance footage for this flight. Specifically, time code 1 hour and 38 minutes after takeoff." Keene frowned. "Is there an incident report I should be aware of?" "There will be," Marcus said simply. He stepped aside, his movements precise, controlled. "Once you've reviewed the footage," Ethan's voice cracked. "Sir, please, this isn't necessary. I can apologize. I didn't know he was—" Marcus's gaze hardened. "You humiliated my son," he said slowly, each word deliberate, cold, and perfectly measured. "And you did it while representing my airline." The silence afterward felt electric. The hum of the auxiliary power unit was the only sound. Even Reed, who had stepped out from the cockpit, stood quietly at the threshold, watching with a mix of awe and discomfort. Ethan's breathing grew uneven. He looked at Jordan, then back to Marcus, searching for any hint of mercy. "I swear, Captain, I—" Marcus raised a hand, cutting him off without needing to raise his voice. "Enough." He turned finally to Mr. Keene, his tone resuming the professionalism of command. "Mr. Keene, I trust Skylinks values integrity and accountability. I'll forward the footage to corporate if needed, but I think you'll know what to do once you see it." Keene's eyes shifted between them, sensing that the situation was far bigger than a simple complaint. "Of course, Captain Carter," he said carefully. "I'll take it from here." But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned his attention back to Ethan, his expression unreadable now. "You wanted attention," he said quietly, letting the words sink in. "You'll get it." Ethan stood frozen, his confidence utterly stripped away. The weight of his uniform suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. Jordan watched from a few rows back, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from something else. Pride, relief, the quiet, awe-filled kind of pride that comes from realizing just how far his father would go to protect him without ever raising his voice. Marcus turned back toward the cockpit, his posture composed. "First Officer Reed," he said evenly, "please file the supplemental log before debrief." "Yes, sir," Reed replied quickly. Jordan stepped into the aisle, and for a brief moment his father's eyes met his. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The moment itself said everything: respect, protection, understanding. Behind them, Ethan stood trembling, knowing that his career was no longer in his control. Keene already had his tablet out, accessing the flight records. The quiet hum of the aircraft seemed almost accusatory now, a reminder of what had been done under its watch. Marcus adjusted his uniform, smoothing the gold stripes on his sleeves, his face calm once more. "You wanted attention," he repeated softly, his eyes still on Ethan. You'll get it. The video hit the internet before dawn. By the time Marcus walked into the terminal the next morning, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Headlines had already taken over social media. Flight attendant mocks teen passenger. Captain's reaction goes viral. Every clip showed Ethan's smirk, Jordan's silent discomfort, and then Marcus stepping out of the cockpit, calm and controlled, but radiating quiet fury. The world saw it all. And now, Skylinks Airlines was scrambling to contain a storm it hadn't seen coming. In the corporate office at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, a handful of executives were already gathered. The blinds were drawn, the air heavy with tension. Marcus sat at the end of a long glass table, still in his crisp captain's uniform. Beside him sat Jordan, silent, fidgeting with his sleeve. Across from them, Mr. Stroud, the head of Skylinks operations, adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "Captain Miles," Stroud began carefully, "first let me assure you that this situation is being handled internally. The company has already issued a preliminary apology to the public." Marcus's gaze didn't move. "An apology without accountability is just noise," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Have you reviewed the full cabin footage yet?" Stroud hesitated. "We've seen the viral clips, yes. We're still waiting on the full internal recordings from the aircraft system." Marcus reached into his flight bag and placed a small drive on the table. "You won't have to wait," he said. "Everything's here. Cabin cam, audio feed, even witness statements from passengers." The room went still. One of the assistants, a young man in a gray suit, leaned forward. "You collected all this yourself?" "I believe in thoroughness," Marcus said. He didn't look at anyone in particular. "Especially when a crew member humiliates a passenger on my aircraft." Stroud shifted uncomfortably. "Captain, with respect, we don't want to make this situation worse by going public with internal material. It could hurt the airline's reputation." Marcus turned his head slightly toward him. The airline's reputation was already damaged the moment Ethan decided to treat a young man like an inconvenience instead of a human being. His eyes flicked toward Jordan, who was still staring down at the table. "My son doesn't deserve to be an example, but he will be one if that's what it takes for this culture to change." Stroud's jaw tightened. "Let's not escalate this further. We'll handle it discreetly. Disciplinary action, retraining, suspension if needed." "Suspension?" Marcus repeated softly, leaning forward now. He mocked a child, tossed trash at him, and laughed. "That's not poor training. That's contempt." The room fell silent again. The low hum of air conditioning filled the pause. After a moment, Stroud sighed and gestured to one of the corporate investigators, Mr. Hale, who sat near the end. "Let's begin the formal questioning." Hale opened a folder. His tone was professional but detached. "Mr. Jordan Miles, can you confirm that flight attendant Ethan Rhodes initiated contact with you during beverage service?" Jordan looked up, startled by how official it sounded. He glanced toward his father, who gave him a small nod. "Yes," Jordan said quietly. "He came to my seat after I asked for a bottle of water." "And what happened next?" Hale asked. Jordan's voice wavered slightly as he recounted the moment. How Ethan rolled his eyes, dropped the trash bag too close, and muttered something under his breath about entitled teens. Marcus listened in silence, his hands folded neatly on the table. When Jordan finished, Hale nodded and made notes. "Thank you. We'll corroborate this with footage." He turned to Marcus. "Captain Miles, I understand you became aware of the situation mid-flight." "I did," Marcus replied evenly. "I couldn't leave the cockpit, but I reviewed the feed as soon as we stabilized altitude. Every second of it, Stroud cleared his throat again, trying to steer the tone. "We appreciate your diligence, Captain. But again, this may be best resolved through internal review." Marcus's reply was quiet, almost too calm. "Not when someone humiliates a child for sport." That line seemed to hang in the air, echoing faintly in the sterile room. Even Hale looked up, pausing mid-note. The meeting ended with promises of further investigation and disciplinary review. But Marcus knew the pattern too well. He'd seen it before, problems buried under polished statements, accountability delayed until the headlines moved on. This time, though, it was personal. As they stepped outside, Jordan finally spoke. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Marcus looked down at him, his expression softening for the first time all morning. "No, son," he said quietly. "They are." Outside the office, journalists had begun to swarm the terminal, cameras flashing as passengers shared their first-hand accounts. Marcus guided Jordan through the crowd, keeping his posture straight, his face unreadable. Reporters called out questions. "Captain Miles, is it true your son was the passenger?" But he didn't respond. Not yet. That night, in the small apartment near the airport hotel, Marcus sat at his desk. His uniform jacket hung neatly over the chair, and his laptop screen glowed faintly in the dim light. One by one, he uploaded the files, the footage, the audio logs, the official timestamps, and witness statements. His folder was labeled simply, Evidence, Skylinks 409. Jordan peeked in from the doorway. "They're still talking about it online," he said. "Everyone's posting the video." Marcus didn't look up. "I know. Some people are saying Ethan should be fired," Jordan added. "Others think it's being exaggerated." Marcus paused, then turned to him. "That's why truth matters. It's not about what people think, it's about what really happened." The next day, Skylinks released another statement, this time announcing that flight attendant Ethan Rhodes was suspended pending investigation. But behind closed doors, Ethan wasn't remorseful. In a quiet conference room, he faced his supervisor, Mr. Keene, and a union representative. "It was a misunderstanding," Ethan insisted, his tone defensive. "The kid was being rude." "I was just doing my job." Keene leaned back, unimpressed. "Doing your job doesn't include making a passenger feel small." Ethan clenched his fists under the table. "You're taking his side because his dad's a captain." "Because his dad's a professional," Keene corrected sharply. "Something you might want to try being." But Ethan wasn't listening. As the meeting ended, he muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." Meanwhile, Marcus attended every interview and inquiry with unwavering calm. When reporters asked him for statements, he had crews, not bullies, he told one news outlet, his voice steady but firm. The quote spread quickly, becoming a rallying cry online. Jordan began receiving messages from strangers, passengers, students, even pilots, sharing their support. Some told their own stories of being mistreated or judged. One message read, "You handled yourself with grace." The world needs to see more of that. Jordan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to attention, and part of him wanted the noise to stop. But another part, the part that had felt so small and powerless on that flight, knew this meant something bigger. One evening, Marcus found him sitting by the window, phone in hand. "You haven't answered any of them?" he asked. Jordan shook his head. "I don't know what to say." Marcus sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Say what's true," he said. "That's all that ever matters." Jordan hesitated, then looked up. "But why us? Why now?" Marcus met his gaze. "Because silence is what lets people like Ethan keep their power. You didn't ask for this, but you can decide what happens next." The boy stared at his father, processing his words. In that quiet moment, he saw the man not as a captain or a viral figure, but as someone who refused to look away from injustice, even when it cost him. Later that night, they sat together at the dining table, the laptop open between them. Marcus's email draft was ready, a formal complaint addressed to corporate leadership with every file attached. Before sending it, he turned the screen toward Jordan. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Jordan took a deep breath. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm ready." Marcus clicked send. The message left with a faint swoosh, carrying everything that had happened, the truth, the proof, the pain, into the hands of those who could no longer ignore it. In the days that followed, the story exploded beyond the airline's control. National outlets picked it up. Public opinion turned fast. Skylinks executives tried to contain the fallout, but Marcus didn't engage in arguments or press theatrics. He stayed grounded, measured, and unshakable. He had already won, not through anger, but through integrity. And when Jordan finally posted his own short message online, it echoed his father's belief. The caption read, "This isn't just about me. It's about anyone who's been treated like they don't belong." The post went viral within hours, shared by thousands. Marcus read it silently, pride flickering in his eyes. Then he looked out the window at the setting sun and said quietly, "This isn't just our fight anymore." Jordan nodded beside him. They didn't need revenge. They had something far stronger, truth. And when the world saw that truth, silence was no longer an option. The morning Skylinks Air's name appeared on every news outlet. The city felt heavier. Screens in cafes, airports, and offices replayed the same footage. Ethan Cole dropping trash at a teenager's feet, the stunned silence that followed, and Captain Marcus Miles stepping out of the cockpit like a storm given human form. Commentators analyzed every frame. Hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag Skylinks Scandal, Captain Miles, hashtag Fly with Respect. Inside Skylinks headquarters, panic reigned. The PR department worked through the night drafting statements, revising them, and watching each version crumble under the weight of public outrage. "We deeply regret the incident aboard Flight 409, one press release read. Another tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. Neither worked. By noon, the company's social media accounts were flooded with passengers' stories. One man posted, "I complained about Ethan Cole last year. They never followed up." Another added, "He called me sir, like it was an insult." The comment section became a river of long-buried grievances, all pointing in one direction. Marcus sat in his small study, the glow of his laptop reflecting in his eyes. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't even smiling. His expression was unreadable, focused, contained. He scrolled through articles, each one painting a broader picture of what had been hidden for years. The headlines didn't surprise him. What did surprise him was how many people had waited for someone else to speak first. Jordan sat across the room, phone in hand. "Dad," he said quietly, "people keep messaging me. Some of them are my age. They're saying things like, 'This happened to me too,' or 'I thought I was overreacting.'" Marcus looked up, his tone soft but steady. "That means they finally feel seen." "But I didn't even do anything," Jordan said. "I just sat there." "That's exactly why it matters," Marcus replied. "You didn't have to shout. You just told the truth." Jordan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. He wasn't used to being a symbol of anything. He still felt like the kid who just wanted to get home, not the boy trending on every major platform. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Ethan Cole sat in a private office across from his lawyer, Mr. Lowell. The blinds were drawn, the tables strewn with papers and news clippings. Lowell, a sharp man in his 40s with a silver tie clip, leaned back in his chair. "They're blowing this out of proportion," Ethan said, pacing. It was one moment. A misunderstanding. Lowell tapped his pen against a legal pad. "The public doesn't care about misunderstandings. They care about what they saw. And right now, what they saw makes you look cruel." Ethan frowned. "So what do we do?" Lowell smiled, faintly, calculating. "We shift the narrative. Say the video was taken out of context. Say the passenger misinterpreted your actions. You were tired, under stress, maybe even provoked Ethan's shoulders relaxed a little. That could work." Lowell nodded slowly. "If we're careful." But Marcus had already anticipated it. That same afternoon, his own attorney, Mr. Bishop, a composed man with decades of aviation law experience, stood with him in front of a camera in a quiet office. "Are you sure you want to release this?" Bishop asked. Marcus nodded. "They're going to twist it if we don't." People deserved to see everything. Bishop sighed but agreed. Within hours, the complete footage was online. The smirk, the dismissive gesture, the laughter that followed, and the quiet humiliation in Jordan's posture. The cockpit feed confirmed every detail, synchronized with timestamps. The truth, now undeniable, spread faster than any rumor could. The following morning, Skylinks headquarters resembled a battlefield. Executives spoke over each other in heated meetings. One group demanded immediate termination for Ethan, another cautioned against rushing to judgment for fear of lawsuits. The CEO's assistant hurried through corridors carrying folders marked confidential. In one of the glass-walled boardrooms, Marcus sat once again across from Stroud, the airline's operations director. The man looked exhausted, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. He gestured toward a thick folder on the table. "Captain Miles," he began carefully, "you've made your point. The situation's complicated." Marcus folded his arms. Complicated is what happens when you ignore problems until they explode. Stroud exhaled through his nose. Ethan's been suspended pending investigation. But if this escalates further, it could cost the company millions. Lawsuits, PR damage, stock drops. We have to think strategically. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Strategic thinking would have been listening to your crew reports the first time someone filed a complaint. Stroud's patience thinned. You're not here to lecture us, Captain. You're here because you're part of this company, and we'd like to keep it that way. A pause. Then he slid a single sheet of paper across the table, a non-disclosure agreement. This is standard, he said. It's best for everyone if we handle this quietly. You'll be compensated, of course. Marcus stared at the paper for a long moment. The faint hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. Then he slowly pushed it back across the table. I signed on to fly planes, he said, his voice low but cutting, not to protect bullies. Stroud blinked, caught off guard. Captain. But Marcus was already standing. His uniform looked immaculate under the fluorescent lights, every line pressed, every detail precise. You have a choice, he said calmly. You can fix your culture, or you can keep covering it up. But if you choose the second, I promise, the sky won't be big enough to hide it. The room went silent. Stroud didn't move. Even the assistant who'd been taking notes froze mid-sentence. For a brief moment, Marcus's words seemed to carry more authority than any executive title in the room. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out. His steps were steady, echoing against the polished floors. Employees in the hallway looked up as he passed, a few nodding subtly, others just watching with quiet admiration. Back at home that evening, Jordan was watching a news broadcast replaying snippets of interviews. Commentators debated whether Marcus Miles had become the conscience of Skylinks. Jordan muted the volume when his father entered the room. They're calling you a hero, he said. Marcus smiled faintly and shook his head. Heroes fix things. I just told the truth. But it's working, Jordan said. People are actually talking about it. Even other airlines are updating their policies. Marcus glanced toward the screen, where the headline read, Captain Miles refuses silence, demands accountability in Skylink scandal. He took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. Change doesn't happen because of headlines, he said quietly. It happens when people stop looking away. Across the country, the fallout deepened. Former crew members began coming forward with their own stories about Ethan. Arrogant remarks, complaints dismissed, passengers offended. A pattern emerged, one too long ignored. Skylinks' board met in emergency session. Reports leaked that several executives were pushing for a full audit of crew conduct and passenger relations. Stroud, though still trying to contain the crisis, found himself increasingly isolated. Every department wanted answers. Every journalist wanted a statement. By the end of the week, Ethan's lawyer had stopped returning press calls. His taken-out-of-context defense had collapsed under the weight of the full video. And Marcus, though exhausted, stood taller than ever. He hadn't sought fame, but he'd earned something far rarer, respect. One night, as rain streaked down the windows of their apartment, Marcus and Jordan sat together in silence. The city lights shimmered in the distance, reflected in the wet pavement below. Jordan finally spoke. Are you scared they'll try to punish you for speaking out? Marcus considered it, then shook his head. They might try. But I've been through worse storms in the sky than this one on the ground. Jordan smiled faintly. I guess you really are the captain? Marcus chuckled quietly. No, son. I'm just a man who decided not to stay quiet. The next morning, when Marcus returned to headquarters for a scheduled debrief, whispers followed him through the corridors. Not out of gossip, but out of respect. People stepped aside as he walked past, his uniform gleaming under the lights. Even those who had doubted him before now understood. Something fundamental had shifted. And when he entered the boardroom once again, Stroud didn't speak. He didn't need to. The balance of power was unmistakable. For the first time, the man in uniform was the one making the rules. The interview began with a calculated pause and a close-up of Ethan Cole's weary eyes. He sat under the studio lights, hands folded, voice trembling just enough to appear sincere. I never meant to hurt anyone, he said softly, staring into the camera. Captain Marcus used his position to destroy my career over a misunderstanding. The host, a sharp-tongued journalist from the sensational news channel Global View Daily, leaned forward, milking every ounce of drama. So you're saying you were unfairly targeted? Ethan nodded slowly, rehearsed pain etched into his expression. The segment title flashed across the bottom of the screen. Flight Attendant Speaks. I was set up by the pilot. Within hours, the interview dominated feeds across the internet. Hashtags erupted, comment sections flooded. Some viewers sympathized, calling Ethan's downfall cancel culture at work. Others saw through the act, recognizing the manipulation beneath the tears. Marcus watched from his living room, the television flickering against his calm but focused face. He didn't flinch or speak. Jordan, sitting nearby, clenched his fists. "Dad, how can they let him lie like that?" he asked, voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. Marcus turned to him, his tone measured but firm. "Because truth takes its time, son. Lies move fast, but they don't last." His words hung in the air, both comforting and prophetic. He switched off the television, letting the silence. But inside, he was already preparing his next move. By morning, major outlets had picked up Ethan's narrative. "Disgraced flight attendant claims retaliation by airline pilot," one headline read. Marcus's inbox flooded with reporters requesting comments, statements, and interviews. Some accused him of using his rank to make an example out of a junior crew member. Others questioned his objectivity as both a father and a captain. The pressure mounted, but Marcus didn't react publicly. Instead, he called his legal advisor, Attorney Briggs, a meticulous man known for his precision. "Collect everything," Marcus said over the phone. "Every file, every timestamp, every witness log. I want the facts to speak for themselves." Briggs agreed immediately, sensing the calm intensity in Marcus's tone. Meanwhile, Jordan found himself caught in the storm. At school, a few classmates whispered about the interview. "Maybe your dad went too far," one boy said hesitantly. The word stung more than Jordan expected. That evening, he scrolled through social media, watching strangers debate his family's integrity. For the first time, he felt doubt creeping in, a quiet, heavy ache behind his ribs. When Marcus noticed, he sat beside his son without saying a word. They watched the comments scroll together in silence until Jordan finally whispered, "What if they're right?" Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Right and wrong don't depend on who yells the loudest," he said. "They depend on what's true when the noise fades." Over the next few days, Briggs worked tirelessly. His office lights burned long into the night as he pieced together digital evidence. Flight logs, passenger statements, security timestamps, and even prior complaints about Ethan's behavior. Some of the reports were shocking. Passengers describing verbal abuse, minor physical altercations, and condescending remarks toward travelers of color. Yet somehow, each incident had been quietly dismissed by management. Briggs leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "He's been protected," he muttered, "by someone high up." Marcus received the compiled dossier a day later. As he flipped through the pages, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Each complaint against Ethan ended with the same supervisor's signature, Mr. Harold Denton, Skylynx's head of cabin operations. Marcus had suspected negligence, but not this level of complicity. He picked up the phone and called Briggs. "If Denton covered for him, this goes beyond one man's arrogance," Marcus said. "It's a culture problem," Briggs agreed. "Then we bring it down from the top," he replied. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Jordan sat at his desk, trying to focus on homework. A knock at his door interrupted him. It was his father, holding an envelope. "This came for you," Marcus said, handing it over. Inside was a handwritten letter from Jordan's teacher, Mr. Talbot, along with signatures from his entire class. "We're proud of you," the message read. "Standing up for what's right is never wrong." Jordan blinked rapidly, holding the letter as if it were made of glass. For the first time since the scandal broke, he smiled. Marcus saw it and nodded quietly. "That's what truth does," he said. "It finds the ones who still believe in it." But the real twist came 3 days later. An anonymous user posted a series of leaked internal emails from Skylynx Air. They revealed a chain of correspondence between Ethan's supervisor and HR officials, discussing how to minimize fallout from his repeated misconduct. One email explicitly stated, "Cole is reckless but useful. Discipline can wait." The internet erupted again, but this time, the tide shifted entirely. News anchors replayed the clips side by side, the interview where Ethan claimed to be a victim, and the damning evidence proving otherwise. The contrast was devastating. Reporters who had once sympathized with Ethan now questioned the airline's leadership. "How deep does this go?" one headline asked. Stock prices for Skylinks Air dropped overnight. The company released a rushed statement promising an independent review. Ethan vanished from public view, his lawyer refusing all further media appearances. Meanwhile, Marcus received a call from Stroud, the same operations director who'd tried to silence him earlier. "Captain, we'd like to issue a joint statement to control the damage," Stroud said carefully. Marcus's reply was calm but unyielding. "Control isn't what this needs," he said. "It needs accountability." The following day, Marcus stood at a podium inside a small press room. The air buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed as he adjusted the microphone, his uniform crisp, his voice steady. "This was never about vengeance," he began. "It's about the standard we set for those who represent this uniform." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Respect is not optional. It's the foundation of service. No one wears these wings with pride if they don't respect the people we serve." The reporters scribbled notes, flashes lighting the room. His words echoed long after he stepped away. When he returned home, Jordan was waiting by the door. "They're saying you changed everything," the boy said, eyes shining. Marcus smiled faintly and shook his head. "No," he replied. "We just reminded them what right looks like." Outside, the night was calm, the storm finally breaking. And as the narrator reflected, the truth, once buried under lies and noise, finally stood on its own. In that moment, the narrator reflects, truth outshone the noise. The conference hall was silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning and the clicking of pens against notepads. A dozen executives sat along a polished oak table, their expressions a mix of tension and forced neutrality. In the center of the room, the ethics board chairman, a tall, gray-haired man named Leonard Graves, adjusted his glasses and looked toward the large screen mounted on the wall. "We will now review the evidence in its entirety," he said firmly. The lights dimmed, and the room filled with the faint sound of static before the video began to play. The footage was clear, painfully so. The slow-motion replay showed Ethan Cole walking down the aisle of the aircraft, trash bag in hand. The cabin lights were dim, passengers resting. The camera captured everything. The moment Ethan stopped beside Jordan's seat, glanced around, and with a smirk, tipped the trash bag over the sleeping teenager's lap. Bits of plastic, napkins, and spilled coffee rained down. Jordan stirred in confusion, his eyes opening in startled disbelief. Then came the faint chuckle from Ethan as he turned away. The video froze at that exact moment. Ethan's smirk caught mid-frame. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan's face flushed deep red. His lawyer, Mr. Lowell, immediately rose to object. "This is highly prejudicial," he began, his voice rising in panic. But Graves raised a hand, cutting him off. "Sit down, counselor," he said sharply. "This board will determine what's relevant." Mr. Lowell sat, visibly deflated. Across the table, Marcus and Jordan sat side by side, their posture straight, their faces calm. The father's steady composure contrasted with Ethan's unraveling mask. "Captain Marcus," the chairman said, turning toward him, "would you like to make a statement before we proceed?" Marcus stood slowly, the light from the projector glinting against the wings on his uniform. His voice was low but carried across the room with quiet authority. "My son deserved respect, not pity," he said. "What happened wasn't an accident. It was a choice." The words hung in the air like a weight. Even the executives who had entered the room detached and defensive now sat frozen, their eyes lowered. Ethan shifted in his chair, sweat gathering at his temples. "It wasn't like that," he blurted out suddenly. "It was a misunderstanding. I was under a lot of stress that day, fatigue from long shifts." "Stress doesn't make people cruel," Marcus interrupted calmly. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone carried a steel edge that cut through the excuses. Ethan's lawyer placed a hand on his client's shoulder, urging him to stay quiet. But Ethan continued, desperation cracking through his voice. You don't understand what it's like in those cabins. We deal with rude passengers every day, people who... Enough, Graves said firmly, his voice echoing. You're not on trial for your workload, Mr. Cole. You're here because of your actions. The next segment of evidence rolled, a witness statement from a passenger named Mr. Daniels. The footage showed him sitting nervously before a smaller camera, his hands fidgeting. I saw it happen, he admitted. I thought it was just a mistake at first. But then I saw him smile. I should have spoken up then. His voice broke slightly. I didn't, and I regret it. The confession sent a ripple through the room. Ethan's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, but none came. One by one, more witnesses were called, passengers and fellow crew members who described years of subtle insults, mishandled complaints, and moments of unprofessional conduct brushed aside by management. The pile of truth grew heavier with every word. During a short recess, Marcus and Jordan stepped into the hallway. The air outside the boardroom felt different, lighter yet charged with tension. Jordan looked up at his father, his expression uncertain. Do you think they'll actually do something this time? He asked quietly. Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze fixed ahead. They have no choice now, he replied. Truth doesn't vanish once it's seen. When they returned, the hearing resumed. Ethan was now visibly unraveling, his tie loosened, his hands trembling. Mr. Lowell whispered frantically in his ear, but Ethan ignored him. You think I'm the only one? He snapped suddenly, his voice echoing through the hall. You think I'm the villain? There are worse people in this company who do worse things every day. I just got caught. His outburst silenced the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Chairman Graves leaned forward, his expression grave. That may be true, he said slowly, but today we're addressing what you did. And you alone must answer for it. Ethan slumped back in his chair, defeated. The board conferred briefly in hushed tones. When they spoke again, the verdict was unanimous. Ethan Cole was dismissed from Skylinks Air, effective immediately with a permanent mark on his employment record for misconduct and violation of ethics policy. Furthermore, the airline would issue a formal apology to the Carter family and commit to a full internal review of staff conduct. The room remained still as Graves delivered the conclusion. Ethan's lawyer gathered his papers in silence, his earlier bravado gone. Ethan stared blankly at the table, his jaw tight, his breath shallow. He didn't look at Marcus or Jordan as they stood to leave. Outside the hearing room, the hallway erupted in flashes of light and the hum of cameras. Reporters swarmed instantly, their microphones thrust forward. Captain Marcus, how do you feel about the outcome? Do you think justice was served? What message do you want to send? The questions came fast, but Marcus didn't rush. He looked at his son first, the young boy's face illuminated by the strobe of cameras. Then he spoke, his tone calm but resolute. We didn't just fight back, he said, placing a hand gently on Jordan's shoulder. We reminded them what decency looks like. The crowd quieted. Even the reporters lowered their microphones slightly. Father and son stood together, framed by the flashing lights, neither seeking attention nor running from it. In that stillness, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in the air itself. The noise of the world softened, replaced by a sense of quiet recognition. For the first time, the boy felt the world finally listening. And for the first time, the boy felt the world finally listening. The applause inside the Skylinks auditorium faded into a low hum as the final slide of the presentation appeared on the massive LED screen. Human Dignity Protocol, a new chapter in aviation. Marcus stood at the podium, his hand resting lightly on the microphone. He didn't smile, not yet. The faces before him, hundreds of employees from pilots to ground crew, watched in anticipation. The air carried the tension of something rare, change that mattered. This isn't about rules, Marcus began, his voice deep and even, echoing through the large, glass-walled hall. It's about respect. It's about remembering that every seat, every uniform, every person has value. His eyes swept across the audience, seasoned captains, young attendants, executives in polished suits. "We can't undo what's been done," he continued, "but we can decide who we become after it." A moment of silence followed before the applause began, slow at first, then building into a unified rhythm. People stood clapping not just for a policy, but for what it represented. Among them, Jordan watched from the third row, his heart thudding with pride. His father wasn't speaking as a victim or an avenger. He was speaking as a leader, one who had turned humiliation into transformation. Months had passed since the investigation that shook the company. Skylinks had weathered lawsuits, public scrutiny, and a wave of resignations. Yet out of the turmoil emerged something new, a resolve to rebuild. Under Marcus's quiet influence, the airline introduced the Human Dignity Protocol, a sweeping reform that required every staff member, regardless of rank, to complete empathy and equality training before receiving promotions or supervisory roles. The policy wasn't met without resistance. Some saw it as corporate overreach, but Marcus had anticipated that. He didn't force agreement. He earned it through patience and proof. During the months of development, Marcus spent long hours in conference rooms, drafting modules, reviewing case studies, and working with senior trainers. The boardroom often smelled of stale coffee and determination. His colleague, Captain Rowan Hayes, one of the most respected senior pilots, once leaned back in his chair after a long session and said, "You're changing the culture, Marcus." Not everyone can say that Marcus only nodded, replying, "Change isn't about speeches. It's about habits." One decision at a time, meanwhile, Jordan had found his own way of healing. While the world moved on, the boy had quietly focused on school, finishing his final exams with top marks. His friends still whispered about the incident sometimes, replaying clips from the viral video that had once consumed their feeds. But Jordan no longer winced when he heard his name attached to it. He'd learned something powerful from watching his father. Silence, when used with purpose, could speak louder than outrage. When he told his guidance counselor he wanted to apply for an aviation internship, the man had blinked in surprise. "After everything that happened?" he'd asked. Jordan smiled faintly. "Because of everything that happened," he said. "I want to fly. Not to escape, but to lead." His father's reaction was quiet pride. He didn't shower him with praise, didn't make a grand speech. Instead, one evening, as they stood in the kitchen, Marcus simply placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You'll be better than me," he said softly. Jordan had laughed awkwardly, unsure whether to believe it. Ethan Cole, on the other hand, had vanished from public life. No official statement was ever issued, no follow-up from the press. Rumors circulated among airline employees that he'd relocated to a small town in the Midwest, working as a ground technician under a new name. Others said he'd left aviation entirely. Marcus never spoke of him again. It wasn't out of bitterness. He simply believed some chapters were better closed quietly. As the Human Dignity Protocol neared its launch, Skylinks organized a grand event to unveil it. The auditorium gleamed with banners carrying the airline's new motto, "Every flight, every voice." The CEO, a composed man named Peter Mallard, introduced Marcus with genuine admiration. "Sometimes," Mallard said, "it takes a storm to remind us how to navigate." When the applause faded, Marcus delivered his address, not from behind the safety of the podium, but walking across the stage, speaking directly to the employees seated before him. He told stories, not of scandal or revenge, but of humanity, of the mechanic who lent his gloves to a stranded passenger, of the janitor who stayed late to comfort a crying child. "Those moments don't make headlines," Marcus said, "but they define who we are. Because integrity isn't something we perform, it's something we live." In the audience, Jordan's chest tightened with pride. He'd never seen his father more composed, more alive. This wasn't the man who'd once returned home with exhaustion in his eyes after every flight. This was someone reborn, not by victory, but by purpose. After the ceremony, employees crowded around to shake Marcus's hand. Even those who had once doubted him, men who had whispered that he was too rigid or idealistic, now approached with quiet respect. One young flight attendant said, "Sir, I wasn't there when it happened, but I saw how you handled it. Thank you for showing us how to be better." Marcus gave a small nod, replying, "Just keep remembering why you wear that badge." When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was slow, respectful, and sincere. Jordan stepped down from the stage, shaking hands with instructors and students alike. Among the trainees, a man in his mid-20s waited until the crowd thinned. He looked uneasy, fidgeting with his lanyard. When he finally approached, his voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I was part of the crew that day." Jordan turned to face him. The man swallowed hard before continuing. "I worked under Ethan. I saw it happen, and I froze. I should have said something. I'm sorry." His eyes glistened, and his voice cracked under the weight of his guilt. Jordan studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "Doing something now," he said quietly, "is what matters." The trainee hesitated, then clasped his hand firmly, relief flickering in his expression. In that handshake, the last of the anger Jordan once carried began to ease. Later that evening, the airfield was quiet except for the distant rumble of engines preparing for the night flights. Marcus waited near Hangar 12, dressed in his captain's uniform, the faint gold of the sunset reflecting off his badge. When Jordan arrived, wearing the dark trainee jacket with Skylynx's new emblem, the wings now encircled by a thin band of silver representing equality, his father smiled. "You ready?" Marcus asked. Jordan nodded. "More than I thought I'd ever be." They boarded the aircraft together, a sleek new training model, and settled into the cockpit. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the faint scent of leather seats and disinfectant. As the engines hummed to life, Marcus guided his son through the pre-flight checks. "Pressure steady," Jordan said, reading the gauges aloud. "Flaps calibrated." Fuel balanced, Marcus glanced at him with quiet pride. "You sound like a pilot already." "I learned from the best," Jordan replied with a small grin. When clearance came through, Marcus guided the plane to the runway. Outside, the horizon stretched like molten gold, the sky painted in streaks of amber and violet. "Takeoff thrust set," Marcus said calmly, hands steady on the controls. The aircraft began to move, slow at first, then faster, the engines roaring as they lifted from the earth. Jordan felt his heart rise with it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The city lights faded below, replaced by endless clouds glowing under the last rays of the sun. Jordan stared out the cockpit window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. "It feels peaceful up here," he murmured. Marcus nodded. "It always does. Up here, it's just you, the sky, and what you carry inside." Jordan turned to him. "Do you ever think about that day?" "Every time I fly," Marcus admitted. "But not with anger anymore. More like a reminder that decency isn't automatic. It's something we have to choose every day." Jordan looked down at the horizon, watching the faint curve of the world stretch beneath them. "You taught me to fly," he said quietly. Marcus smiled, his hands firm on the yoke. "No, son," he replied. "You taught me to land." For a while, neither spoke again. The engines hummed steadily, the lights inside the cockpit glowing faintly against their faces. Below them, the clouds drifted in silver patterns, and the stars began to appear one by one. The moment felt suspended between past and future, like the calm between storms. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Marcus leaned back, his expression calm but thoughtful. He glanced at Jordan, who was watching the endless horizon ahead with a quiet determination that reminded him of himself years ago. "Flying," Marcus said softly, almost to himself, "isn't about control. It's about trust," Jordan nodded. "Then I trust you, Dad." Marcus smiled, the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. "And I trust you." The aircraft glided smoothly through the clouds, their reflections mirrored on the windshield. For both of them, the sky no longer symbolized escape. It was connection, healing, and legacy. The tragedy that once threatened to divide them had become the foundation for something stronger. Below, the world continued in its rhythm, planes taking off, others landing, passengers moving between destinations, unaware of the lesson written in the skies above them. But for Marcus and Jordan, the journey was no longer about distance. It was about understanding. They sat together, surrounded by light, sound, and silence that felt almost sacred. Marcus adjusted the autopilot and looked ahead. "You know," he said with a hint of a smile, I think we're finally heading the right way." Jordan looked out the window one last time. The sun had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving a faint golden afterglow that shimmered across the clouds. He smiled softly. And at 30,000 feet, both understood that some journeys never really end. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was slow, respectful, and sincere. Jordan stepped down from the stage, shaking hands with instructors and students alike. Among the trainees, a man in his mid-20s waited until the crowd thinned. He looked uneasy, fidgeting with his lanyard. When he finally approached, his voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I was part of the crew that day." Jordan turned to face him. The man swallowed hard before continuing. "I worked under Ethan. I saw it happen, and I froze. I should have said something. I'm sorry." His eyes glistened, and his voice cracked under the weight of his guilt. Jordan studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "Doing something now," he said quietly, "is what matters." The trainee hesitated, then clasped his hand firmly, relief flickering in his expression. In that handshake, the last of the anger Jordan once carried began to ease. Later that evening, the airfield was quiet except for the distant rumble of engines preparing for the night flights. Marcus waited near Hangar 12, dressed in his captain's uniform, the faint gold of the sunset reflecting off his badge. When Jordan arrived, wearing the dark trainee jacket with Skylynx's new emblem, the wings now encircled by a thin band of silver representing equality, his father smiled. "You ready?" Marcus asked. Jordan nodded. "More than I thought I'd ever be." They boarded the aircraft together, a sleek new training model, and settled into the cockpit. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the faint scent of leather seats and disinfectant. As the engines hummed to life, Marcus guided his son through the pre-flight checks. "Pressure steady," Jordan said, reading the gauges aloud. "Flaps calibrated." Fuel balanced, Marcus glanced at him with quiet pride. "You sound like a pilot already." "I learned from the best," Jordan replied with a small grin. When clearance came through, Marcus guided the plane to the runway. Outside, the horizon stretched like molten gold, the sky painted in streaks of amber and violet. "Takeoff thrust set," Marcus said calmly, hands steady on the controls. The aircraft began to move, slow at first, then faster, the engines roaring as they lifted from the earth. Jordan felt his heart rise with it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The city lights faded below, replaced by endless clouds glowing under the last rays of the sun. Jordan stared out the cockpit window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. "It feels peaceful up here," he murmured. Marcus nodded. "It always does. Up here, it's just you, the sky, and what you carry inside." Jordan turned to him. "Do you ever think about that day?" "Every time I fly," Marcus admitted. "But not with anger anymore. More like a reminder that decency isn't automatic. It's something we have to choose every day." Jordan looked down at the horizon, watching the faint curve of the world stretch beneath them. "You taught me to fly," he said quietly. Marcus smiled, his hands firm on the yoke. "No, son," he replied. "You taught me to land." For a while, neither spoke again. The engines hummed steadily, the lights inside the cockpit glowing faintly against their faces. Below them, the clouds drifted in silver patterns, and the stars began to appear one by one. The moment felt suspended between past and future, like the calm between storms. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Marcus leaned back, his expression calm but thoughtful. He glanced at Jordan, who was watching the endless horizon ahead with a quiet determination that reminded him of himself years ago. "Flying," Marcus said softly, almost to himself, "isn't about control. It's about trust," Jordan nodded. "Then I trust you, Dad." Marcus smiled, the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. "And I trust you." The aircraft glided smoothly through the clouds, their reflections mirrored on the windshield. For both of them, the sky no longer symbolized escape. It was connection, healing, and legacy. The tragedy that once threatened to divide them had become the foundation for something stronger. Below, the world continued in its rhythm, Planes taking off, others landing, passengers moving between destinations, unaware of the lesson written in the skies above them. But for Marcus and Jordan, the journey was no longer about distance. It was about understanding. They sat together, surrounded by light, sound, and silence that felt almost sacred. Marcus adjusted the autopilot and looked ahead. "You know," he said with a hint of a smile, "I think we're finally heading the right way." Jordan looked out the window one last time. The sun had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving a faint golden afterglow that shimmered across the clouds. He smiled softly. And at 30,000 feet, both understood that some journeys never really end. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racial prejudice, unjustified aggression against a minor, and the severe consequences of professional misconduct. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of dignity and accountability, showing that vicious disrespect can lead to instant, high-level corporate repercussions.